Okay, so thank you, and thanks everybody for coming. I told Professor McCall after Wednesday's meeting that I was so extraordinarily happy that I don't have to do any of this anymore because I was even, feeling anxious and overwhelmed after her talk about sitcast, et cetera. So, having been there, and I would say having been there when things were a little, I think, less stressful, maybe a little less competitive than they are now. I can certainly appreciate all of the, potential stress and anxiety that you may be experiencing, going through this process. So, when we think about, personal statements, I can see mostly everybody here. Just do me a favor and in the reactions, just put a thumbs up on your screen if you have already begun to think about or write your personal statement. Okay. Yeah, so little less than half. Okay, terrific. So when we think about, this personal statement, I think a lot of students get very worried because, what am I supposed to put in it? What should it sound like? Should it sound like more of an academic paper? Does it have to be formal? Can I tell a story? Can I use a quote? What is it that everybody wants to know? And so with that, I am going to share my screen and just give you some basic information. And I would like for this to be as interactive as possible, if we can, and do a little dialoguing about some of the things that we might think about for our personal statements. Okay, so can everybody see that?
We can see.
Good. Okay. All right. So let me just hide that. Okay, so, like I say to everybody, there really is no secret formula to writing a personal statement. I used to say there is no best way to write it, and I don't know that that's necessarily the case, but there are a lot of different ways that you can approach writing your statement, okay? And so just a few things to keep in mind as you start getting this ball rolling, okay? All right, so we have to think about the purpose of the personal statement, okay? And so the idea is that you want to give program committees information about yourself that they can't find by looking anywhere else in your application. Okay, so we don't want to be talking about our grades. We certainly don't want to talk about our GRE scores. If you have provided the committee with a resume, it's not really necessary to list things that are on your resume because they can see that. Your letters of recommendation are going to tell us about your academic potential. So anything that the committee can find in other places in your application should pretty much be left out of your personal statement. It doesn't mean that you can't include aspects of that, but it's not just saying that it's there. It's a matter of how am I going to elaborate on that so that I can give this committee some information about the kind of person that I am and why I would be good for their program. Okay, so I like to put this out to the group, and I am wondering how everybody got to this point. So I would venture to say that for many of you, when you started thinking about speech language pathology, you probably didn't know all that much about it. So if everybody could just put a little, just a little sentence in the chat, how did you arrive at speech language pathology as a major? Okay, so I'm going to give everybody a chance to respond to that. And as briefly as possible. Okay, so I'm thinking I heard great things about the profession. Somebody worked in an ENT office. Somebody told them about it. Wanted to have a fulfilling career. Interested in education first. Okay, there's a lot of that. That was a possibility for me as well. Right, some people have had therapy. Teacher. Okay, we have a singer. We get a lot of singers. Right, a family member who's an SLP. Right, family member had therapy. Knew I wanted to work with children. Okay, so this is pretty common, I would say. And so when we think about this, right, nobody mentioned that they didn't know what they wanted to do, right? Some students, actually many students, start their college careers really having no idea where they want their career path to go. And sometimes it's a matter of taking a course that seems really interesting, and that leads you to explore a little bit more, right? And if that is the case, then that's absolutely fine to talk about in your statement. You don't have to have some life-changing experience, right, to have a graduate program look at you and say, oh, this is the person I want for my program. Okay. Some students get involved, they start taking courses, they're still maybe not so sure as they're coming along, but they start seeing actual therapy, and they really begin to see that, wow, this is something that I'd like to do. Now I really know I'm in the right place. Now I really see where what my professors taught me in class is coming to life. Okay. Some people just find that they're becoming aware of the impact of communication disorders. So like some of you mentioned, you may have had a friend or a family member who had some kind of a communication disorder. Many students say that, you know, they had a grandparent who had a stroke and aphasia, and that's really how they learned about the therapy process and made them more interested in the field, right? And for other people, sometimes it's just, I had no idea what to do, and so I tried a couple of classes. I had a student once tell me that my mother told me that I should do it because speech language pathologists make a lot of money. Okay. And she said, all right, you know, I'll take a class. And it ended up that she absolutely loved it. And she didn't even care about the money piece anymore. She just really loved what she was learning about. Okay. So when we think about the personal statement, right? Like I said, there is so much information about you in your application. And this is your opportunity to let the committee know who you are. Okay, so I like to encourage students to maybe talk about experiences that have helped shape the person you've become. To perhaps talk about some unique talents, right, that you may have, because we all have something to give that nobody else does. And that's just by nature of us all being individuals. And then I think it's also important to reflect a little bit on what you see as your individual strengths and your individual weaknesses, right? Because we all have things that we're really good at. We all have things that are problematic for us. And so just by way of an example, one of my personal strengths is that I am very analytical. I absolutely love to take apart a language sample and look at all of the intricacies of it. Okay, I don't have a lot of time to do that, you know, when you have a lot of clients, but I love doing it. Now, that is also probably not surprisingly, my Achilles heel, because sometimes, because I really love, right, getting into all of the minutia sometimes, I can sometimes lose the forest for the trees. And so knowing that about myself allows me to try to make some decisions about when it's worthwhile to really dig deep, and maybe when it's not, maybe to just look at the gestalt, right, and see what I can do there. Okay, so I'd like for everybody now to take a moment, think about what do you have as maybe a unique talent, or what do you see as an individual strength of yours? Okay, so just take a minute to put that in the chat. Okay, so Lori says she's very detail-oriented, right? Christine's thinking about advocacy. Ashley's saying she's a good multitasker, right? We're compassionate, dedicated. What else? Empathy. Good listener. Trilingual, wonderful, along with the optimistic and passionate, right? Push myself. Optimism. And Erin, I would say that there's probably very few people in this group that don't go the extra mile, right? To some extent. It's part of the nature of the beast, I think, right? Compassion. Okay. Somebody mentioned being a singer, so that is certainly a great strength or a unique talent. Lots of our singers go on to be wonderful voice therapists. Okay, so now the question is, okay, I would say these are qualities that students mention all the time. I'm sure that many of you speak more than one language, which is certainly a wonderful strength to have for sure. And I would say that just about everybody here would probably say that they are compassionate, that they're empathic, right? That they push themselves. Some of us are more detail oriented than others, and that's okay. Some of us are great multitaskers. I myself am not. Okay, so when I've got a lot going on, if I do not have all of the color coding and notes and everything else, I'm going to start missing things. Okay, so that's great. Okay, so now the idea, right, is how do we take that and what is it that you bring to the graduate program, right? And to the field. Now, I think this is a little bit harder for us to kind of grasp as you're in the midst of your applications and saying, well, you know, what is it that I can bring to the field, right? Because one of the things that a committee will expect from all of its applicants is that you are a very bright group, that you are strong academically, that most of you probably manage your time pretty well. We certainly expect that you have a sense of compassion and empathy for people because you're going to be in a helping profession, right? And so how do we build on that in a statement that allows a reader to look at what you have written and say, wow, this is a really great candidate. Okay, so think for a moment what it is that you can bring to a program. Okay, and so the other piece, I know Professor Ball will sometimes ask students the question when they come to her for a letter of recommendation is, why do you want to go to graduate school? And I have asked that question of students myself and have been met with kind of like the deer in the headlights look sometimes, because we know we have to go to graduate school in order to be speech language pathologists. But let's think a little bit about what it is you've experienced, the knowledge that you've gained, and what you know about yourself, and what do you hope to obtain in graduate school, or as the question on the screen asks here, how do you see your best self evolving? So that if somebody were to ask you, why do you want to go to graduate school, you would have an answer for them. So let's take a minute to think about that, and let's put some responses in the chat. Because it's not just because I have to go. There are reasons that you really want to do this. Would like to be the first in my family, right? To earn a master's degree. Continue to learn what I need to know so I can apply it in the real world. Do something meaningful for my community. Connect with other people in a similar field. I want to give back because of what I experienced. Right? Looking to explore the setting that I feel that I would want to work in. Is there anyone who already has a sense of the area within the field that they are interested in working? I knew right away I wanted to work with language and literacy. Right? Need to gain the education and experience I need, right? To be the best clinician you can be. I've met students who know immediately in undergrad that they want to work with children with autism, or they want to work with adults with aphasia. Right? Right. So we're seeing here clinical setting with stroke victims, children with autism, ASD, right? Medical. right? Learned about TBI, head and neck cancer, really made me think about that, right? Okay. All right, so before we go to the do's and don'ts, I'd like for everyone to think a little bit about some of the responses that we've had and how is it that you can take what brought you to the field. Erin's talking about, right, working with bilingual clients, right? What brought you to the field, what you see as your strengths, right? Perhaps some of you have a sense of where you want to go. And how do you talk about that? Okay, so I'm going to throw it out there for people to just speak or put some thoughts in the chat. Okay. Okay, so Christina's saying that there are far too many children and adults, right, who have communication disorders, and there may not be the resources. And that's where our advocacy comes in. Okay, how else? Let's think about how we put those first three pieces together. Oh, Erin, I don't know what the up caret means.
It just means she's agreeing with the top comment.
Oh, okay. That's kind of what I figured, but okay, so I learned something new. Usually it's my daughter that has to fill me in on all that. Any other thoughts about how we put this together? Okay, so just show of hands. Oh, let me see. Okay, show of hands. How many of you have volunteered in some capacity in either a hospital, a daycare, a school, a camp for children with special needs, or or adults? Okay. Okay, so let's go back to the chat. Community center. Yeah, so lots of you, right? You've been gaining some experience. So maybe like in a sentence or two, what was the biggest take home for you from that experience that you've had? Okay, so feel free to just unmute yourself and shout out or put it in the chat. My very first volunteer experience was at about 18 years old at St. Mary's Hospital for Children, when it was more of a respite type facility for children who had extensive illnesses. And at that very tender age, the big take home for me was that there were a lot of kids that needed long-term medical assistance, and it's not something I would have thought of at that point. Right, learning by the book is important, but every individual is different and has to be treated according to their individual needs and strengths. Made me aware of my capabilities and what age group I'd be comfortable with. So much diversity in the field. Anybody have a particular client that they worked with in one of these facilities that really kind of touched you very deeply? Right, so the impact and knowing that the parents' feedback let them know that the children were really using the techniques. Olivia, did you want to talk?
Yeah, I just didn't want to cut you off, but
No, that's okay.
in regards to when you said about a particular client or person, I worked with this child who had a stutter over the summer, and it was very hard for him to communicate a lot of the time. And I always had this notion that, like, especially children, if they're like, you can tell that they're struggling to say something, or even they can't just express themselves, or if they're starting to hyperventilate or even cry, that like you should attend to them and just like overload them with this emotion, like, oh, it's okay, like, don't worry, like. And with him it was always different, and I've learned that it's always better to give him his distance and his space for him to articulate correctly and for him to just calm down himself. And at the end of the summer, his mom went up to me and was like, you know, he was so happy that you would kind of move away from him and allow him to figure it out himself, because he kind of wanted that independence for him. And then I've learned that boundaries are like definitely something that someone should consider when working with children, especially. And space is always good, and it's not necessarily that you want to go up to them and tend to them. Of course you do, but doing it with not like just not overloading, I guess. And that's my biggest takeaway.
Yeah, so that's really important. And I think it comes back to that idea of individual strengths and differences, right? And I mean, strengths and difficulties, but also individual differences, right, as well. Thank you, Olivia. So Ilana's talking about a child on the autism spectrum and had difficulty communicating his emotions, right? And with patience, right? Giving lots of patience, right? And building that relationship. Any other thoughts? Okay. Okay, so when we're trying to build, right, build our personal statements, definitely some do's and don'ts here, okay? So you certainly do want to begin as early as you can and spend a good time in reflection, right? Talk to someone about why you chose this field and what has inspired you, right? Because you may find that in just having a conversation with someone who doesn't, I mean, someone who knows you, but also someone who maybe doesn't understand the field so much, that you can get some material for your statement. There's many times that I have students come to me with a personal statement, and I take a look at it, and I don't see much about the individual. And then as I start speaking to the student and asking some questions and getting information, we find that there's a lot more that really can go into this statement that wasn't there before. Okay. Remember also that the reviewers are reading anywhere between 300 and 500 of these, okay, depending on the program. And so there are going to be a lot of statements that sound alike. And so the idea is that you really want yours to stand out. So you want to make sure that you are including information that really does speak to who you are as a person. You also want to make sure that you're writing formally, although it's not an academic paper, and you want to write with conviction because you're telling your story. Okay. Okay, and so I ask students to think about, if you were writing an autobiography, what would you want people to know about you, right? Now, it's hard to do that in 500 words, but really think about it, because there are only so many places, so many spots in these graduate programs, and if you want to stand out, this is a good place to do it. Okay. All right. With that said, do not be redundant. Okay. So this is what I mentioned earlier on. Don't include information that is easily found elsewhere in your application. Okay. Excuse me. Expanding on some of that information is terrific. If your resume includes the fact that you were a camp counselor and you had X, Y, and Z responsibilities, terrific. But the idea would be to talk about how that experience helped you grow. What did you learn from that experience? Okay. Don't be too personal. Okay. So remember, these reviewers are strangers. And so you have to consider what may or may not be appropriate to discuss. Okay. And we can talk about that a little bit more. Okay. And again, don't just list your accomplishments and activities. It's more important to discuss what you learned from them, right? And how they helped you grow in some way, either professionally, academically, personally. Okay. Remember that your statement is a writing sample. Okay. So in terms of format, you want it to look like a paper. Okay. But it is a personal narrative. So it doesn't have to have, the thesis statement that we all struggle writing. And there are many, many ways to begin. Some students start with a quote that they like, and then just kind of move on from there and talk about why it's important to them. Some people start with a specific experience in their lives and then go on to talk about why that was important. Some students begin with their struggle to find the right major. Some students begin with the fact that they always knew that they wanted to be a speech and language therapist, right? So there's no right way to begin. There's a lot of different ways to begin this because it's a narrative. So you do have a lot of flexibility. The idea is that you want to capture the attention of your reader. Okay, so remember, you can't talk about too much. Okay, what you really consider to be important to share with your readers is what you want to focus on. It is not helpful to talk about too many things because you can't elaborate on too many things in 500 words. Okay, maybe one or two, right? And it all depends on what it is that you feel is important to discuss. What do you want to share with these, with the committee that is going to help them supplement all of the good academic work that you do by giving them some good information about who you are as a person. Okay, so again, if you're talking about the fact, say, for example, that you know the importance of having enough bilingual therapists, it's probably a good idea to share an example of perhaps maybe a situation where you maybe knew someone who was having difficulty getting services in the home language because there weren't SLPs in the area that spoke the language, right? Something like that. Okay. And of course, like anything else, you want a very good conclusion. Okay. So I like to say that the very last sentence that your readers read is just as important as the first one. You need to tie it up in a nice way and leave your reader with a strong impression of who you are as a person. Okay. So I ask this of students, please don't show your statement to other students in the program. Okay. Students get very anxious about this, and it's not a good idea for any one person to be looking at other people's statements because they are personal, and your personal statement should not look similar to somebody else's. Okay. I would say to get some input from no more than 2 people, right? If you have too much advice from too many people, it can leave you more confused as opposed to gaining clarity. So make sure that these are people who you trust, maybe one professor who could maybe help you organize a little bit or knows you a little bit better as a student, and maybe a family member who really knows who you are as a person. Okay. Proofread, I cannot say enough to proofread for your grammar and spelling, and have someone look it over if you need to, for sure. Okay, and be sure to use your own voice. Okay, so you know, I've had situations where people have come to me and I would ask them about maybe a paragraph in their statement, and somebody said, well, somebody told me that I should make it sound more academic because that would be impressive or whatever, and that's not necessarily the case. Right? You know yourself best. And if you're trying to make this a personal statement and trying to let people know who you are as a person, then it's really important to use your own voice, and don't be tempted by things that you find on the internet or something somebody tells you, right? You don't have to have 20, 5-syllable words in your statement. Okay. You really just need to be yourself. Okay. So you all can do this. Okay. I have faith in every one of you. And it's not an easy task, probably the most difficult of everything that you will need to do in terms of graduate applications. But it really does take time, consideration, lots and lots of revision. Okay, so I'm gonna open it up for questions, starting with the one that was on the Google Doc. Somebody had mentioned that they started a master's program several years back and stopped for a specific reason, and wanted to know whether or not that was something that should be in the statement, or would it be best left for the extra information that some colleges ask for. Okay, so what I would say about that is it probably depends, and I would say that if there was a way to tie that into the trajectory of your journey, there would be no problem with inserting it into the statement if it factors into how you got to where you are. It could also be left out completely. Okay, unless there's a transcript that needs to be obtained where there might be a question that, okay, there's this transcript here, but what happened? Okay, so I think depending on this situation and how that factors into how you got to where you are, you could or could not put it into the personal statement. Okay, any other questions about content? Yes. Make sure, the question is, are we allowed to abbreviate speech language pathologist? As long as you write it out first, you can say SLP after that. That's fine. Okay. And always make sure that you refer to the profession as speech language pathology. Okay. Any other questions about content? Yes, Lucy.
Yeah, sorry. I had another question. I had a paragraph that was 254 words, but it required 250. Am I allowed to leave it at 54? Or is there something I should take out?
I would say that's probably not a big deal unless that statement goes into a box that's counting your words and won't let you go over 250. I think it should be fine.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions about content? The GPA question comes up a lot. Some students who are career changers may have had a first career in which maybe the grades were not so wonderful, and want to know whether or not to talk about that. And again, I think it depends. Oftentimes, students who return to school are returning for a very specific purpose. Either they were unhappy with their first career, or they realized that they couldn't earn as good a living, whatever it is, and have come to this understanding, full well that they have to be very, very diligent about their studies, or sometimes it's just motivation. So again, I think if you are concerned about GPA, that also has to be taken into consideration as to whether or not you're going to put it in your statement, right? Depending on the reasons. Typically, reviewers are looking at your entire application. And so if we see a couple of poor grades in your, first and second semester, much of that we chalk up to transition to college. Sometimes students do really poorly in something like physics and they do well in everything else. So that one poor grade is not going to have that much of an impact. Okay. No, you can single space. Yeah, you can single space it. Most students do. Okay, so if you're only allowed one page, I would absolutely single space. Most of the times you're given a word count. Typically it's 500, sometimes it's 300, which can be very, very challenging. So I would probably start with a 500 word essay. Any other general questions? Okay. I know everyone was coming in and thinking that I was going to tell you exactly how to write your statement. But it's never like that because everyone's statement is different. Yes, of course, you can always reach out to me regarding the personal statements, and I am happy to review any of your statements. I can only provide you with general feedback because there's always a chance that I might be on the committee. So, so I cannot provide you with anything super specific, but I certainly can give you some general feedback.
Does anyone else have any questions for President Navarra? I mean, I would just like to say thank you for offering your help and just reading it. I think we all understand that staff can be super busy. So I think any chance that we have someone that's willing to help us out, even the little way, we really appreciate it. So definitely thank you for that.
Mhm.
But thank you for coming. Thank you for your time. This is so great. I know that I'm struggling with this a lot right now, so this was very great. But thank you so much, Professor Navarra.
Yeah, I will, I don't know, do you, I guess, show of hands, does everybody like, like a little just like decision trees, things like that about, what you put in, what you don't put in, or, maybe how to take a piece of information, expand on it. I found, when I've had to write personal statements, both for graduate school, for tenure, I find that just writing as though I was writing in a journal can be helpful, because you get thoughts out about what it is that you are looking for, right? From a graduate program. And sometimes that just helps to say, okay, so I've got all of this down. No, I wouldn't want to put that in. Yeah, I think this is really important. The other thing, there are some people who will go to a college's website. If you're interested in doing research with a certain professor, there are students who put that in there. Just as a caveat to that, you should make sure that when you look at the faculty page and you look at that particular faculty member's interests, don't assume that that person is conducting research at that particular moment. You might have to do a little bit more digging. There are some faculty members who do research that are only teaching one course, especially at CUNY. We have a number of faculty members who are primarily at the graduate center working with the PhD students, and they don't work with the graduate students. So it would not be a good idea to have that person in your personal statement as someone you want to do research with, because you probably wouldn't have the opportunity. So just make sure that when you're doing your homework, that anybody who is listed on a website is actually engaging in that process at present. Any other thoughts, questions? Okay, so my email is on the slideshow that I will send to Sophia. So as I said, please feel free to send me your statements and, give me a week or so to take a look at them. And I am happy to help you in any way I can.
All right. Thank you so much again.
Okay, and best of luck to everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
And just for everyone staying on, if you can stay on just for a minute for a few reminders and updates. Next week, we won't be having a official initial meeting, but BLASC will be meeting with an SLP named Desiree Young that works with children. So if you're interested, please attend that. You'll definitely get points for attending that as well. And then the next 2 weeks after that, we're still finalizing something. So we'll just keep you in the loop and let you know what the plan is. And also, this is the last weekend to participate in the virtual walk. So if you can do that, that'd be great. If you don't do the walk and the donation, you won't get the full 4 points. So just make sure to keep tabs on that if you plan on doing that. But otherwise, that's all. But thank you guys for coming. It was great seeing you guys.
Okay. Sophia, can I have the board for 5 minutes?
Yeah, no worries.
Okay.
All right, you guys are free to go.